I stood in the middle of the kitchen, holding a small, yellowed piece of paper in my hands, unable to understand how it had ended up in my apartment. I was sure I hadn't opened my father's box of belongings today. I hadn't opened it in years. But the note was lying on the table as if someone had left it there a minute ago. It contained only one sentence, written in familiar, sharp handwriting. You never asked me about the most important thing. This phrase seemed to push the air around it away. The words rang hollow and insistent, like a memory that had been avoided for too long. I sat down on a chair, placed the note in front of me, and tried to understand how I was holding something in my hands that, according to all logical laws, could not have materialized on its own. My father died 10 years ago. He was buried quietly, without long speeches or funeral songs. And although I told everyone that I had accepted it, that time had smoothed everything over, I now realized that I had been deceiving others and myself. The note smelled of old paper and something else, something that painfully pricked my memory. The smell of machine oil. The same smell that came from my father's tools, from the garage where he disappeared in the evenings after work. A smell I hated as a child because it meant one thing. Again, there would be no time for conversation. I ran my fingers over the sharp lines of the handwriting, and a wave of long-standing, thick, unresolved anguish rose inside me. Why now? Why this phrase? And what does the most important thing even mean? I stood up as if someone had pushed me and quickly headed for the bedroom. I opened the closet door. I pulled out an old box that I had been afraid to touch for years. A tightly sealed box with my father's belongings lay there, as if waiting for my defeat. I cut the tape. Inside was the usual chaos: metal parts, a worn wallet, small photographs, one of my father's notebooks with sketches. There was no note inside. I was overcome by a strange feeling, as if I had stepped into a thin crack between realities, where forgotten thoughts materialize in the present. But I pushed the absurdity away. You can't give in to the irrational. That's what my father always told me. I went back to the kitchen. The note was still there, and that only made it worse. I sat down, burying my face in my hands. The world seemed to spin. I tried to collect my thoughts, but one thing buzzed in my head. I had to understand what this was. To explain why this scrap of paper managed to knock me out of my normal state, I need to tell you something about the person to whom it probably belonged. My father was one of those people who always kept their distance. He didn't yell, lose his temper, or lecture, but his cold calmness sometimes hurt more than any scream. He was a master mechanic. He could take apart and reassemble anything, from an old alarm clock to a truck engine. People came to him with broken things as their last hope, and he never took any money. He just shrugged his shoulders and said, "I find it interesting." But there was one paradox. My father was never interested in people. He understood details but avoided people. The relationship between us, if you could call it that, was complicated, silent, sticky. I often tried to talk to him about school, about what I was doing well, about what I wasn't doing well. But he always answered briefly, sometimes rudely, sometimes as if he hadn't heard me. And the only time I saw a real concern in his eyes was the day I snapped and said, "Are you even interested in what's going on in my life?" He looked at me as if I had come too close to something that should not be touched. And he replied, "You're asking the wrong questions." At the time, I decided it was just a strange phrase. In fact, I was angry. The wrong questions, well, what do you think are the right ones? What should I ask if you're a wall yourself? But he never explained. Years later, those words remained the only thing I clearly remembered. Maybe this note is some kind of symbolic echo. Maybe I'm just tired, and my brain decided to play a joke on me, bringing my subconscious fears to life. But why the smell? Why the handwriting? Why is the paper the same as the one my father used? I picked up the note again. I turned it over. There on the back was a date. August 12th, 2013. The day my father and I had our last argument. A month and a half before his death. My heart ached. Now it was no longer a coincidence. I avoided the thought that my father might have been hiding something. For years, I convinced myself that there were no secrets. He was just a private person, just tired, just complicated. But deep down, I always felt that there was more to it than that. His nighttime departures from home, his locked workshop, which no one was allowed to enter, his strange, long phone conversations, which he would cut short as soon as I entered the room. His constant tension, as if he were waiting for something, or afraid. And now, this phrase, "You never asked me about the most important thing." I paced around the apartment. I walked once, twice, 3 times around. I tried to breathe evenly, but something inside me had already cracked. And then I did something I hadn't done in 10 years. I drove to the house where my father, mother, and I had lived. The drive took 40 minutes. I drove on autopilot, my fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The sun was setting, its golden rays burning the glass, and it seemed to me that everything around me was freezing, as if the air had become viscous, like syrup, as if time had paused. The house greeted me with absolute silence. No one had lived here since my mother left to stay with her sister in another city. The wooden gate creaked like in old movies. The path leading to the porch was overgrown with grass. The windows were dark and cloudy. And yet, as soon as I opened the door, the silence inside seemed almost offended, as if it had been interrupted. I entered the hallway. The walls were the same, pale, faded beige. There was a faint smell of old books and dust in the air. And another note of machine oil. I froze. No, it couldn't be. That smell had been haunting me all day. It hadn't been here for 10 years. But now it seemed to wash over me like a wave. I went to the workshop. The door was locked. The very door that had been off limits in my childhood. I remember my father saying, "Don't go in there without me. It's dangerous." And I wasn't afraid of the tools. I was afraid of his reaction. I took out the old key that was kept under the doormat. I turned it. The lock clicked softly, as if it had never rusted. I went in. The workshop looked as if my father had left it yesterday. The tools were neatly arranged. On the table was an unfinished gearbox. On the wall hung diagrams written in my father's hand. And in the air, that same smell. I took a step, then another, and I saw something new on the workbench. Something that definitely hadn't been there before. A small metal box, tightly closed. I touched it. The metal was cold, as if it had been stored outside. Unnaturally cold for indoors. I opened the box. My hands were shaking. Inside was an envelope. White, clean, as if it had been delivered that morning. My teenage nickname was written on it. The one my father used to call me when he was still trying to be warm. Tim. My legs buckled. I sank into a chair. I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. And the first line was exactly the same as on that note. "You never asked me the most important question." I gasped. It was his handwriting. Absolutely certain. I could tell by every letter, every slant. But the date in the corner of the letter sent a chill through me. August 12th, 2023. A year ago, 10 years after his death. I reread the numbers. Several times. They didn't change. No, that's impossible. It's absurd. But the letter was real. So real that I could smell the ink. I began to read on, and the more words unfolded before me, the stronger I felt that the previous version of my life, the one in which I thought people simply didn't understand me, that my father was just cold, was now falling apart. If you're reading this, then I did everything right. I know I did wrong. I know I was a bad father. And I know that one day you will understand I couldn't tell you the truth before. You never asked the right questions, Tim. And I never had the courage to tell you what the right questions were. That's why I disappeared into my workshop, why I left at night, why I shut myself off. Not because I didn't love you, but because I couldn't put you in danger. Now it's too late to explain. And maybe you won't believe me anyway. But if you found this letter, it means that something has gotten out of control. You need to know the truth. Or at least try to. I stopped. My chest tightened. I didn't understand what was going on. What truth? What threat? What the hell? But I kept reading. The things I did in my workshop were never just mechanisms. You thought I was repairing machines. Everyone thought so, but I was always doing something else. I studied things that don't officially exist, things that cannot be spoken of. And one day, I did something I shouldn't have done. I felt everything inside me freeze, as if someone invisible had squeezed my heart. I opened the door, Tim, a door that shouldn't have been opened, and I paid for it. If you're reading this, it means the consequences have reached you too. The letter ended there, an unfinished sentence, as if the letter had been written in a hurry. or as if someone had interrupted it. I sat motionless, unable to feel my legs, arms, or breath. The words echoed in my head. The door. The consequences. Threat. Some kind of madness. Irrational nonsense. As if my father wasn't a mechanic, but a character in a cheap conspiracy novel. But the note, the letter, the smell, the date. Too many coincidences. Too many impossibilities. I put the letter back in the box, closed it, and placed it on the table. I stood up, and for the first time in many years, I felt not anger, not resentment, but fear. Quiet. Icy. It suddenly dawned on me. This was no accident. This was the beginning of something. Something that had been hidden in this workshop for years. Something my father had tried to keep under lock and key. And if he was telling the truth, that thing was no longer locked away. I scanned the workshop, trying to understand what exactly he meant. What could be so dangerous here? And then something clicked. I turned around sharply. For a second, it seemed to me that the workshop door had opened by itself. But the door didn't move. It was closed, just as it had been a minute ago. I stood motionless, staring at it, my heart pounding wildly in my chest. Maybe it was the wind? A draft? Although the window was closed. Or was stress causing hallucinations? I hadn't been in this room for 10 years. My memory could be playing tricks on me. But the feeling of someone else's presence did not go away. On the contrary, it seemed to intensify around me. I slowly approached the door and placed my palm on the cold handle. It was slightly damp, as if someone had recently touched it. I jerked my hand away. How could there be moisture on a metal handle in an empty house? Silence fell like a heavy blanket. I took a breath and exhaled, tried to regain some control over myself. But inside, everything revolved around one thing. My father was not who he seemed to be, and I had never been able to see it my whole life. I went back to the table, picked up the box with the letter, and suddenly noticed something strange. On one of the top cabinets was an old, dusty magnet. It had a picture of some seaside town on it. I had never seen it before. I moved closer. The magnet was attached to a metal door that I don't think I had even noticed before. It looked like part of the cabinet, but upon closer inspection, it became clear that it was a separate hidden compartment. The magnet came off unexpectedly easily, as if it had been placed there not for decoration, but to conceal a small keyhole. I inserted my fingernail into the narrow slit, pulled. The door creaked slightly and gave way, revealing a tiny niche inside. And in it lay a small flash drive. 2 words were written on the case in marker. Do not open. I couldn't help but smile, nervously, almost convulsively. Seriously? Secret notes, mysterious letters, and now a flash drive with do not open written on it? It all seemed more like a thriller than my reality. But my father never played games. He didn't leave riddles. He was straightforward, cold, practical like a wrench. If he wrote that, it meant he was really afraid that others would see it. I took the flash drive and turned it over in my hands. It was warm, even though it had been lying in a cold metal compartment. I needed to get out of there and deal with it at home, where the air wasn't thick with the past. I put the flash drive in my pocket, closed the secret door, took the envelope, and was about to leave the workshop when I heard a sound, barely audible, a second long, as if someone had run their finger across wood. I turned around. There was no one in the workshop, only tools and dim light. But the sound was real. Or was I imagining things? I froze. I listened. Silence. Probably just nerves. Nothing more. Just nerves. I turned off the light, left the workshop, and closed the door. But when I clicked the lock, I suddenly realized there was something inside this room that my father was hiding, and it wasn't because of paranoia. He was hiding it from me. And now, perhaps it was too late. The road back was different. The sky was overcast with gray clouds. There was a heavy humidity in the air, as if a thunderstorm was debating whether to start right now or wait for a better moment. The car drove almost by itself. I didn't remember the traffic lights or the turns. Everything merged into a single stream of anxious thoughts. I thought about my father, about our last argument, about how abruptly he cut me off then, about how he left the house on the night when it all happened, when they found him by the road, lying on the wet asphalt, without any documents or a phone, just as if he had gone out for a walk and suddenly died. The doctors said it was his heart, sudden cardiac arrest. But I remembered him. He never complained about his heart. He was as strong as iron. Even when he got tired, he just clenched his jaw and kept working. And when I think about it, a month before his death, he was acting strange, as if he was constantly thinking about something, as if he was going to say something but couldn't make up his mind. For many years, I didn't allow myself to doubt. But now doubt was the only thing possible. I parked at my building. In my hands, I held my keys, a bag with an envelope, and a flash drive. 1,000 thoughts raced through my head. I entered the apartment without turning on the light. I threw my jacket on a chair. I sat down at the computer and turned on the monitor and waited for the system to boot up. The flash drive lay on the table like a small metal sentence. I stared at it for a long time. Don't open it. My father asked me not to. But my father and secrets were something new, and I couldn't leave it unanswered. I inserted the flash drive. A single video file appeared on the screen. The title was blank, just a dash. The size was 1.2 gigabytes. Filmed a year ago. My hands trembled. I clicked on the file. The video opened. At first, there was darkness. Then a crackling sound. Noise. And then a faint light like that of a table lamp. And in the frame, my father. I jumped back from the chair as if I had been electrocuted. He was sitting at that very table in the workshop, looking straight into the camera. Tired. Much older than I remembered. His face was not just serious. It was tormented, as if he had spent the night in constant fear. He was silent for a few seconds, then said, "If you can see this, then I failed." His voice was muffled, slightly hoarse. "Tim, son, I'm sorry. I know you'll never believe what you're about to hear. And I can't blame you. I don't fully believe it myself. But time is running out." He looked around nervously. "I'm being followed." I involuntarily held my breath. I discovered something I should have left alone. "Don't ask what it is. You won't believe it until you see it. And I don't want you to see it. That's why I kept quiet for so many years. That's why I kept you away." He lowered his eyes and sighed heavily. "You know, I always thought I'd have time to explain everything. But when I realized I didn't, I started to prepare. I left a letter. I left this recording. And I left what should have remained hidden." He raised his head, and in his eyes was a fear I had never seen before. "Tim, if they get to you too, know one thing. I did everything I could to protect you, even if it seemed like indifference, even if it destroyed our bond." He leaned closer to the camera. "Don't tell anyone. Anyone. Not even your mother." He looked away again, as if he had heard something. "I think they're here." There was a sharp, loud knock in the frame, as if someone had punched the workshop door. His father flinched. He moved away. "Tim, don't look for me. Don't repeat my mistakes." Another knock. "I love you, son." And in the next moment, the light went out. The camera made a noise. A rustle. A scrape. Some strange sounds like metal against metal. Then silence. The recording stopped. I sat in front of the monitor, unable to breathe or feel my heartbeat. I stared at the screen, and only one thought stood before my eyes. This can't be a setup. This can't be editing. This can't be real. But it was, and something inside me, something deeply hidden, told me that my father was telling the truth. Or at least, that's what he believed. I touched the screen. My fingers were trembling. Who were they? What door did he open? Why was he alive a year ago if he had been buried 10 years ago? Maybe it was someone's cruel joke? But who could have known his handwriting, his scent, the dates, his nickname for me? I leaned back in my chair, and only then did I notice another detail. In the lower left corner of the video window was a hidden system icon. Small, almost transparent. It glowed red. Active recording. Someone was watching me at that very moment. Or something. I pulled out the flash drive. The monitor flashed, but the icon didn't disappear. I froze, and suddenly, a quiet knock on my front door. One. Pause. Second. The third was much louder. I froze, as if I had ceased to exist. The knock on the door shattered the silence of my apartment so abruptly that something inside me snapped. Once. Pause. Once. Once. I could hear someone breathing behind the door. I couldn't explain why I knew this. It just did. And the breathing was strange. It didn't sound human or mechanical or anything recognizable. It was too steady, too rhythmic. as if someone was trying to imitate a human. I slowly got up from my chair. I felt my legs buckle. The room around me seemed to shift slightly, tilting like a passenger ship in a storm. I tiptoed to the door, as if my life depended on how quietly I moved. I approached and stopped a step away. The knocking stopped, but the breathing did not. I listened, and suddenly I heard another sound, barely audible, as if someone had run their fingernail across the wood of my door. Not like a person, more like checking, examining, as if someone wanted to understand the structure of the material, its thickness, its density. An unfamiliar sound, unpleasant, piercing. I involuntarily held my breath. And then silence. Absolute. I had never heard such silence before, not even on the quietest, most silent nights. It was a silence that wasn't just absent of sound. It seemed to absorb it. And suddenly, a whisper, very quiet, almost indistinguishable. But I heard it, right by the doorframe, the thinnest drawn out, as if erased by distance. "You found him, Tim." I recoiled. My heart burst into wild panic. My throat went dry. My blood ran cold. It was a voice, similar to a human voice, but something about it was wrong, some kind of vagueness, as if the speaker was trying to repeat the words without understanding their meaning. "Don't open it," whispered the voice. "But let me in." "No, no." I knew that if I made a sound, the thing behind the door would sense me. I began to back away quietly, very slowly. My heels barely touched the floor. I was walking on my toes. I held my breath as if my lungs could give me away. But then there was another sound, a rustle, a creak, as if something sharp had been dragged across the bottom of the door, slowly, methodically, testing its strength. And at that moment, I heard my father's voice in my memory. "If they get to you." I took 2 quick steps back, and then a sudden, sharp blow to the door, like a battering ram. I cried out, muffling my voice with my hand. The front door shook and bent inward slightly. Only the lock held in place. The blow was repeated, harder. The lock creaked plaintively. I darted back into the hallway, ran down to the entrance, looked back. The door was already bending as if a car were pushing it from the other side. I rushed into the bedroom and pulled the window. It was difficult to open. I climbed onto the fire escape. I grabbed the cold metal bars. And just as I was about to close the window, I heard another sound. Not a knock, not a screech, not a bang, but a quiet, drawn-out sound, like a wet breath in a crack. And a voice, much closer. "Tim, don't run." I dropped the window frame and rushed down the stairs. The steps seemed to float beneath my feet. I stumbled, hitting my elbow hard on the metal railing, but I didn't stop. I descended floor after floor, almost blindly, until I found myself at the bottom in the courtyard. Night had already fallen on the city. The air was thick and humid. A dark silhouette fell from my window, as if someone was slowly walking past my curtain. I didn't look up. I rushed to the car. I opened the door. I jumped in. With trembling hands, I turned the key. The engine roared, as if it had caught the panic I was feeling. I flew out of the yard, sped down the street, not knowing where I was going. The city seemed empty. The street lights were dim. The houses seemed blind. Only in the rearview mirror did I see a silhouette on the roof of one of the houses, leaning forward, too tall, too elongated, too not human. It seemed to be looking directly at my car. And when I drove through the intersection, he stepped back and disappeared into the darkness. I drove for a long time, longer than it took to leave the city. I just kept pressing the gas pedal until my hands moved automatically, until I drove beyond its limits, to a place where the darkness no longer reflected the light from the windows. The countryside, an empty road, headlights, and my heart pounding a desperate rhythm in my ribs. After another 20 minutes, I pulled over to the side of the road. No houses, no streetlights, just a strip of forest and the rustle of the wind. And for the first time in hours, I allowed myself to breathe. But the fear remained. It got under my skin, and it seemed to whisper, "This is only the beginning." I laid my head on the steering wheel. The flash drive was in the inside pocket of my jacket. The envelope was in the glove compartment, and the sign date was still burning in front of my eyes. 2023, the year my father was alive? Or did someone want me to think that? I raised my head. I turned on the interior light in the car. I took out the envelope. I opened the letter. I reread it again, and only now did I notice what I had missed the first time. On the back of the letter, in the lower right corner, another word was written in very small letters. Find, and below it were coordinates. I stared at them. A familiar feeling of anxiety mixed with something else. That very thirst for truth that had always been my weakness. My father had given me a path, but he didn't explain where it led. If he was alive a year ago, if he left these coordinates, if the person who came to my house was looking for this very letter, then I had no choice. I had to get there first. I started the engine. The headlights pierced the darkness, and I drove to the spot on the map that my father had marked a year after his death. Every cell in my body screamed that it was a trap, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. If my father really wanted to say something, if he didn't die the way I was told, if someone or something was after him, then perhaps the truth was the only thing that could save me or destroy me. But I have to find out. An hour later, the road led me to an abandoned industrial zone. Huge rusty hangars, fences with sagging barbed wire, concrete blocks creaking in the wind. The coordinates led straight to an old warehouse, a windowless concrete monolith with a single metal door. I got out of the car. The wind blew in my face. A thin bolt of lightning split the sky, but there was no thunder, as if the electricity had passed through the atmosphere itself. I stepped toward the warehouse. Every instinct screamed, turn around, but something else was inside me, something that pulled me forward, a force I couldn't explain. I grabbed the heavy metal door and pulled. It gave way almost effortlessly, as if someone had recently entered and not closed it. I went inside. Darkness enveloped me immediately. It smelled damp, metallic, and something else. A smell similar to the one in the workshop. I took out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam revealed a table in the darkness. On it were tools, diagrams, and some kind of equipment. Everything was scattered around, as if it had been left in a hurry. Against the wall was an old metal cabinet. I moved closer, lighting my way, and suddenly, I saw a piece of paper lying on the floor. Judging by the thickness of the dust layer, it was no more than a couple of days old. I bent down and picked it up. There was only one sentence on it, in the same handwriting. Tim, you're too late. My chest tightened, and at that moment, something clicked behind me. Sharp, metallic, as if a huge lock had slammed shut. I turned around. The metal door through which I had entered was locked from the inside, and in the darkness of the warehouse, I heard a familiar whisper. I told you, don't open it. The voice in the darkness wasn't just scary. It was familiar, painfully, convulsively, to the very last trembling nerve. I slowly turned my head, feeling the air around me become denser, heavier, as if the warehouse itself had begun to breathe. The beam of light from my phone flickered, and it seemed as if the darkness would swallow it at any moment. Somewhere deep inside the room, something creaked quietly, like metal under unimaginable pressure. Show yourself, I whispered, not recognizing my own voice. The whisper did not answer, but the darkness seemed to move. Not footsteps, not movement, but a shift, as if something was hiding in the depths of the warehouse, something that didn't use ordinary means of transportation, something that moved differently. I raised the flashlight higher, and for a second, the beam caught someone's figure. I jumped so violently that I almost dropped my phone. The figure was standing, leaning against a metal rack. A low silhouette, shoulders slumped, head tilted forward. It stood there, as if waiting for me to approach. Who are you? I shouted. The figure didn't answer. It just slowly raised its head. And at that moment, my blood ran cold. It was my father's face. Pale, gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept for many nights. He looked alive, but his eyes were not the eyes of a living person. They were dark, too dark, deep, like bottomless pits that did not reflect light. He looked at me as if he knew I would come closer anyway. Dad, I whispered. The word came out on its own, like when I was a child and still believed that one day he would hug me and say warm words. Now I didn't know what I was hoping for, but part of me, weak, tired, desperate, was still looking to him for salvation. He took a step forward, but was the wrong move. Too smooth, too gliding, as if he didn't need his legs. "Tim," he said, and the sound of his voice in that emptiness made me flinch. "You shouldn't have come. You were alive. You left me a letter, a flash drive." I was choking on my words, my chest tightening. "You said you were being followed. By whom? What is this? What's going on?" He paused for a second. He tilted his head, as if analyzing my words. "I haven't been alive for a long time, Tim." Those words fell into the warehouse space like a block of ice. I took a step back. He stepped forward. "What you see," he continued, "is not me. I made too many mistakes. I opened what should not have been touched. I awakened what should have remained locked away. And it took me. It takes everyone who knows of its existence." "What is it?" I blurted out. "Who are they? Why do you look like that? Why did I hear you at my door?" He raised his hand slowly, as if testing his human movements. His fingers were too long. His joints seemed to move with a delay. "They," my father said softly, "they take the form of those you trust. They use what is dear to you. They don't speak, they copy. I'm just a shell, a form that attracts you." He took another half step closer, and I understood. I realized that the fear that had lived in me from childhood until today was nothing compared to this moment. Because now I saw that what stood before me was not my father. It was a reflection, a shell, a mechanism assembled from his image. "Why did you leave me a letter?" I asked, almost crying from the tension. "You wrote in 2023. You were alive. What does this mean?" My father's figure trembled slightly, as if there had been a glitch in its movement. The shadow on his face distorted. A smile appeared suddenly, deep, too wide, stretching his lips unnaturally. "It writes," said father. "It knows your memory, your pain, your weakness. It knew you would come. It knew you couldn't keep the secret. Your stories are the same. A son searches for his father. A man searches for the truth. People always go where they shouldn't be." I was barely breathing. "You're not my father," I whispered. The father's eyes shone with a dead gleam. "I'm everything you feared, and everything you wanted." He lunged at me. I fell backward, hitting my back on the concrete floor. The phone flew out of my hands, and the beam of light went out. In absolute darkness, I heard something scraping metal, coming closer to me. I got up blindly. My nerves were screaming. My heart was racing. I rushed to the table, hit it with my hip, and grabbed the first thing I could find, a heavy wrench. My breath came out like a beast. "Don't run, Tim," came a voice from behind me. "I've been waiting for you." I swung the wrench, just to do something so I wouldn't die without a fight. The blow hit empty air, and then the light flashed on by itself. From a ceiling, from somewhere above, sharp, white, piercing. And in that light, I saw what was standing in front of me. It wasn't a person, nor was it my father. It was something elongated, narrow, bony, as if sculpted from shadows, with bone segments instead of joints and long fingers like metal tentacles. The face, now without a mask, was smooth as the surface of a doll's egg, with sunken black hollows for eyes. And this creature was trying to take the form of my father. But in the bright light, it faltered, trembled, lost its shape. "You open the door," it hissed in a strange voice. "Now it won't close." I lunged backward. I struck him squarely in the center of his head with the wrench. A dull, crunching sound filled the air. The creature recoiled, hissed, and twitched. I seized the moment. I ran to the metal door. I pulled a handle. Locked, but from the inside. If it could be opened from the outside, then it could be opened from the inside. I rammed it with my shoulder. Once, twice, 3. The creature was already approaching. Its footsteps sounded like crunching glass. It stretched out its arm, long, too long, toward my back. And then the lock gave way. The door swung open. I jumped out with such force that I fell to the ground. I jumped up, slammed the door, and ran to the car. My heart was pounding so hard that I couldn't hear anything around me. I started the engine. I floored it. The car shot away, as if it too wanted to escape from what was happening. In the rearview mirror, I saw the warehouse door, slightly ajar, and a shadow leaning out. But the creature did not come out, as if the headlights were holding it back. I sped onto the highway. The forest flashed by on the side. The air seemed thick, and only after many long minutes was I able to breathe evenly. I drove all night. By morning, I was already far away in another region. I didn't know where I was going. I just ran. I ran from the darkness, from the creature, from my father's voice, from myself, from what I had seen. But over time, the panic subsided, and what always comes after fear came: understanding. My father was really trying to protect me. He really did discover something he shouldn't have. And it didn't matter if it was a scientific experiment, a mystical intrusion, or something that couldn't be described in any language. What mattered was that he paid for it. And that's something now new about me. I watched the sun rise over the empty highway. The sky slowly turned golden. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a strange calm. The truth I had been searching for all my life turned out to be unbearable. It did not bring me relief. It didn't make me happy. It destroyed what little I had left of my opinion of myself, my father, and the world. But it gave me what my father wanted to leave behind: the most important thing, a warning. The main question I didn't ask him was simple: what are you protecting me from? Now I knew, and I knew that this story didn't end in one warehouse. They don't forget. They don't let go. They don't stop imitating those you loved. But I had something my father didn't have: an understanding of what is happening to me, and a chance, however small, to do what he didn't have time to do: to close the door. I looked at the rising sun and suddenly realized, for the first time in many years, that I didn't feel aimless. The fear hadn't disappeared, but alongside it came determination. I turned on my turn signal and turned onto a new road. Let the journey be long. Let me not know where it leads. Let there be something ahead that scares me to death. But now I know one thing: if darkness is looking for me, it means I'm going where I'm supposed to be.